In music, a tonic is a crucial part of a chord. It is the middle note that helps anchor down the highs and lows and creates a harmony. Here at the Tonic Accord, our goal is to be the tonic note in the political arena. We want to bring the right and left together for a discussion. A country needs a moderate and sensible center to bring the outer extremes together. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord. My name's Alex, and I'm here with Drew. Drew, how's your week going?
It's been all right. It was a good weekend. Did some camping, did some fishing, and I'm feeling refreshed and ready for the week.
Nice, I like it. I was hoping with Labor Day that maybe there'd be a little bit more tranquility, much needed barbecuing, and maybe just kicking back with friends. But unfortunately, I couldn't get off the notifications of all of the things that are happening all around us, internationally, domestically. I feel like it's just nonstop. I mean, internationally in the UK, Boris Johnson, Britain's prime minister, asked the Queen to suspend Parliament. The move caught opposition parties and many of Mr. Johnson's own conservatives off guard. Obviously, it seems like they're trying to delay the UK's exit vote because they don't have a plan. And then on our side of the pond, we have Hurricane Dorian that has proved to be one of the most violent and damaging hurricanes to ever hit the Bahamas. I saw photos and it just looked awful. Of course, we're politicizing this again because Trump, doesn't know how to speak about hurricanes. He didn't know that we've actually had other Category 5 hurricanes. He's golfing too much, according to Democrats, the usual. Then I was late to know because I kind of checked out last week, but there was another mass shooting in Texas between Midland and Odessa where 7 people were killed and 25 were injured. Unfortunately, this is becoming the new norm, and I don't like how unresponsive I was when I heard this news. In the 2020 election news, Joe Biden's having more cringy baffs. It seems like every day there's something new, a lot of questions about his age and mental awareness. But then I guess in the time of Trump, a lot of people are saying it doesn't really matter, I guess, sometimes what you say. And then in the partisan showdown over Trump's presidency, the inspector general, inquired into James Comey's usage of those memos. And they did deem that some of it was not legal, though they're not going to press charges. And there's a lot we could talk about. I think personally, I'd like to just probably focus on Brexit, Comey, and maybe some of the Democratic debate issues. So I don't know if it's okay with you. Maybe we could dive into Comey first, because even though it hasn't been dominating the news cycle, I think it's one of the more interesting developments since it's been going on for 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I think for a lot of Americans, it's like this whole chapter is over with the FBI, the Mueller investigations, and kind of by proxy the James Comey stuff. I think a lot of people just don't care anymore. But for someone that's politically inclined and wants to follow and understand the inner workings of our government functions, this is very interesting that how the DOJ looked into what he did and his leaking and everything regarding that. So yeah, I think I understand why it's not great headline news, and I think a lot of people are just done with the FBI and that whole Trump thing. But it does bring up because he was looked at it as far as leaking, and people thought, or at least some people might have wanted James Comey to see some kind of justice or jail time or whatever they view as justice based on his leaking and breaking of FBI protocol. So it was interesting that this is kind of just dying with a whimper instead of another bang.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, it's James Comey to me is an interesting public icon. He's obviously a public servant with a great track record. And he's a smart man, and I really don't think he's a partisan hack, as both CNN and Fox News have actually said at different times,
That's true, for different reasons.
Right. And sorry, but I think the big question that I want us to dive into is, should James Comey have kept those memos as personal and private property without FBI approval? And did what he do, does he think he's above the FBI? Because there's clear guidelines and laws that say he shouldn't have done what he did involving Trump.
Yeah, it's one of those tough things though, because it's on the face value, he went against FBI policy, A lot of people that work in the FBI said, it's a dangerous precedent, a dangerous example of kind of what he did. But it's also the kind of thing that's like, how bad is stealing if it's stealing to get bread to feed a kid? It's kind of the motive behind it. His motive was to reveal memos that led to a special counsel investigation of something he thought was very serious to and possibly, affects would want to be public interest. And that's exactly what happened, right? His memos getting leaked led to a special counsel that indicted dozens of people and looked at all the Russian influence in the election campaign, as well as, brought up questions about obstruction of justice from Donald Trump. So, like, his intention, I think, was good. But it is an interesting precedent that, he's keeping things from the FBI and leaking memos to the press because he knew someone at a paper. So it's one of those tough things where I understand that, maybe he needs to get a slap on the wrist or well, I mean, in this case, he's already no longer employed by the FBI, but, there needs to be some kind of like, all right, maybe this isn't the best example or the best way to deal with things. But I don't think he deserves like jail time. I don't think I do agree with you that I don't think he's some like Clinton pocket party hack or or the other way around. I think he generally thought that leaking the memos would benefit the American people and lead to a special counsel.
Yeah, and I think I somewhat agree, but I do want to take a step back and just if anyone is kind of a little bit rusty on what Comey did and why this is up again. I guess I want to talk so there were, I believe, 7 memos that Comey released. What would it be? The spring into summer of 2017, I think it was. And basically, these memos involved different conversations and different just information sharings with himself and the president. And arguably, these conversations involved classified material. Now, the term classified can be easily taken in many different ways, but basically what happened was, let me see, the Inspector General, Michael E. Horowitz, this is recent now, faulted Mr. Comey for handing the memos over to his attorneys, one of whom provided the contents of one document to a New York Times reporter. And so the problem was after that, then this information was put out without the consent of the FBI or without the FBI actually having any knowledge that Comey was doing this because he deemed these as private and personal memos. And the problem is that they're saying that that's just a dangerous example for FBI employees. And I think it's a valid point is that, I mean, I think what we have to ask ourselves is, did he do this because he didn't politically like Donald Trump, which I think a lot of people on the right would say, or was it because he actually thought Donald Trump was a risk and he wanted to be a patriot? And I think there's actually valid arguments for both sides of that because he has been shown to have kind of murky judgment.
Yeah, and I also don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? Like he can do something that he thinks is, okay, well, I was just asked. I mean, I was just personally asked by the president to do something that I think is obstruction of justice. That can also lead him to dislike the president. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that Comey probably doesn't like Donald Trump. Right. But yeah, I don't think it's like, it wasn't trying to be some political thing. It was, I was sitting down to dinner with this guy and he asked me to forget the whole Flynn thing. Like that's a big deal. I also think it's worth noting too that the investigation into this leaking found that none of the classified information that Comey shared outside the FBI made it into the press. Now, again, he did share classified information outside of the FBI, but it's not public currently. Right. And so that's one thing that, at least he or the person he leaked it to was careful not to put out things that were really damaging and not damaging, but like potentially a security threat to the United States, right? All the classified information. So it does seem like James Comey was not super reckless. Like it does seem like he did break protocol, but he was doing it in a way that he's like, well, I know that this has serious importance and serious implications, and I don't want this to just be a reckless kind of leak where, it could potentially harm people outside of who I intend.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, man. And I guess the issue for me is that, because I agree with you, I don't think it was anything actually detrimental to national security interests or our people abroad or X, Y, and Z here. But I guess where I have issues is that it does set up a dangerous precedent when there are FBI guidelines and just departmental guidelines in general throughout the U.S. government that say this is illegal, and then he did it, and I mean, so according to an executive order that Obama signed in 2010, it stated that by default, any document referencing foreign government information or foreign affairs is automatically assumed to be classified, which, I mean, that could be debated if that's good or not. But the problem is with this memo, too, that Comey did release to his attorneys. So now not all of it went out to the public. But the thing is, his attorneys did, I believe, see the undisclosed things, such as dealings with the Russian investigation and dealings with world leaders, which were considered to be classified. So I think you're right that it didn't get out to the press, but it's a very careless maneuver to do, especially when there are governmental standards that say you cannot do this, And I think the problem is the coverage on this has been so sparse and so one-sided, because some see him as a martyr, and the problem is we don't actually look at just the carelessness of it. And I think a lot of conservatives would argue that this whole Russia investigation under Mueller was started by something that might have been careless leaking, which I don't totally buy into that, but I think it is a good talking point to mention.
Yeah, well, and again, it definitely sets a dangerous precedent, right? That, like, if we just, everyone's a hero for leaking classified information, like, this time, okay, it's not too bad, but the next time it might be really bad, and things can get leaked that our adversaries can get a hold of or whatever, or domestic people can now use against the FBI. Like, it does set a dangerous precedent, and I wish that James Comey might have gone a different route because of now he's such a questionable character that people use as a means to kind of disregard the entire Mueller report. So I don't know, it's just kind of a shame that it's happening like this. I don't think the guy is like a hardened criminal or a political hack. But yeah, he's maybe just a tad sloppy or misguided.
Yeah, so I have to ask you, going off that, because I think you're right. Like, this goes a little off of Comey, but do you think it was the Lisa Page and Strzok controversy that added to this, or do you think it was just kind of the next step in this growing kind of deep state conspiracy on the right?
Oh, look, that whole deep state conspiracy has been around for decades. It's only now getting more and more in the spotlight because the message behind it is getting more mainstream, right? I mean, people have always thought that there was the Clinton kill list or whatever, the list of names that Bill Clinton had a hit for. It's been around. It's been thrown around on the internet for like 20 years, but now I think it's just because you have a president that sometimes insinuates it, right? That it's becoming more mainstream to think like this. But yeah, the Peter Strzok, I can never say his name, Strzok, and Lisa Page thing, that certainly didn't help. And it's worth noting that like they were terminated from the investigation immediately, but and it's not like Mueller had any knowledge of their personal texts. But it definitely doesn't help. I mean, it definitely looks bad. I think anything with such grandiose, like anything that's this big, right? Like a massive investigation into the president that has a lot of media, that has a lot of moving parts. I mean, people are going to find what they want to find. We find that all the time in today's news cycle anyway, right? People, if you want to really if you're trying to dig for something that's going to reaffirm your worldview, you're going to find it in today's news. It's just that's the problem, is so many people just do that instead of looking at the whole picture and trying to get an understanding of what's really happening, or the best understanding, and going from there. I think a lot of people just try to find what they need out of something. So they'll say, oh, Comey leak, he's a leaker. Strzok is, Peter Strzok, and blah, they were Hillary Clinton lovers, and that means the whole investigation was a pro-Clinton thing. On the other hand, too, now that we know that Donald Trump in the Mueller investigation was not found to be working for Putin or whatever, it was just found that he might have some obstruction of justice issues. A lot of people were saying, "Oh no, that can't be." There's the DOJ is covering up all the real Russia stuff. Like, it's just people want to find what they want to find, and so we have to sift away from that.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I mean, it brings it back to, I think I mentioned earlier, but the thing is back to Comey, is that he really isn't a partisan hack, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget, is that before these memos came out and before Comey testified, Comey was credited with not being beneficial for Hillary's election in 2016. You know, I mean, he decided to reopen that investigation into her emails a week before the 2016 election, which I don't think, I would argue that did not take the election from her. I think there were a lot of other factors, but it definitely casts her in a negative, corrupt light, right? And so it's funny because, everyone wants to say that Comey played hardball and dirty ball to get Trump blackmailed or whatever you want to spin it. But, I mean, he basically, to me, just seems to be a person that, as smart as he is, just lacks judgment in crucial situations. And I think it's actually hurt both sides. And so that actually would kind of back up that I don't think he's a partisan hack or a deep state member. He just is someone that doesn't seem to be able to know his timing is bad. You know?
Yeah. he would, let's say he would not make a very good comedian with his timing. But I also think that people forget how like apolitical some parts of government are, right? We we're such in a politically charged environment, but you have to remember that like at the upper echelons of like the military, investigative bureaus, right? The FBI, CIA, they're there for 20, 30 years. They see presidents come and go. Like, little moments of political flair are less important to these massive institutions than stability and security. So when you see someone like James Comey acting like this, or Mueller, right, and people are like, well, how has he voted in the past? That's irrelevant. And Mueller even said in an interview that he's like, they asked him about, who did your people you hired vote for? He's like, that never comes up. We don't ask that at all. We go by who is qualified based on their experience. That's it. There's no discussion of politics. And so I think a lot of people have to remember that, like, sure, people have their own opinions in their private life, but when you're at this top echelon of government function, I mean, I think it goes past like who did you vote for in the last election. Like, people are way more concerned with the overall goals of national security, national safety, and like the general, democracy as a whole, whether or not it's with an R or a D in front of it.
Yeah, that's an astute point. That's a very astute point. And I think I actually have to say, I think that in some ways the media is responsible for this, because I think over the last couple of years there's been this idea of we need to know everyone's political leanings. Right. It's especially clear in Hollywood and in comedy and the music industry. It's, it kind of goes back sometimes to the deplatforming issues with it, that I think that we just think that everyone, with everything being so politicized, we think that everyone is using their political view in their work. And I think you're completely right, is that, yes, politicians do it. Yes, we all have opinions, but in your day-to-day life, a lot of people don't need to actually have a political opinion. I mean,
right.
Unless you're Chappelle or Nancy Pelosi, I don't know that a guy working at an auto repair company or a musician trying to make ends meet doing live shows is really thinking about, do I agree with this person because they like Donald Trump, And I mean, we see this just awfully, is that everything's politicized. And it's like now, don't buy from this company because they supported Trump, or, these have liberal leanings, I don't like that show anymore, And I think it's not the way we need to run things. Like, I don't care if Brad Pitt's a liberal or if he's a far right guy, actually, and I don't know, and I'm glad about it.
Right. Exactly.
So I don't know, man.
Yeah, you're right. No, I don't need to know everyone's political opinion. It should matter. It should matter less than it does now for people, because like, you're right. I mean, you have like, an episode of Arthur getting scrubbed from Arkansas TV, or it's Arkansas or Alabama, I'm gonna have to find out, but just because of his like liberal leanings or whatever, or vice versa. You find out Walmart donated to a Republican once, and then I'm never gonna go to Walmart. Yeah, please, okay, sure.
Yeah.
But that's the whole problem, that like this whole like playing for a team. It's like people associate their political opinions so much with their like personal identity and their way of being now, that if someone disagrees with them, or if an entity disagrees with them, it's like, then you don't want me to exist, or everything you do must be against what I do. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. You can have very functioning relationships and friendships with people that don't see eye to eye politically, because the reality is no one sees exactly eye to eye on everything. So it's like, the fact that, exactly. I don't know. It is getting more and more politicized, and I think you're right. I think the media is playing into it because it drives clicks, it drives revenue, and if it drives revenue to paint James Comey as a political hack, then CNN and Fox will all do it.
Yeah, yeah, and I wasn't going to get into this till later, but it's came up so perfectly that, I mean, so I've been watching General, James Mattis has been all over the news. He's
Right.
been doing all the morning interviews, and before we started recording, I was watching a couple of them. First off, I want to say he is a true patriot and a great man. But second off, I'm kind of mad at how the media has been trying to just get him to budge on talking bad about Trump. I think everyone knows that he resigned because he cherishes allies and cherishes our involvement in causes that we've been involved in. And I think it's clear that he does not see eye to eye with Trump. But everyone wants the clickbait soundbite
Right.
of him saying Trump's a bad president. And he said it so perfectly today. He basically said that we're so tribal now, we're so divisive, and we only look at the bads in one another, but we don't look at the similarities. And he said after 9/11, we sent our troops over there to Afghanistan, and we were joined by the Turks, the Jordanians, the Germans, the Brits, and X, Y, and Z, and they weren't there because they were attacked. They were there because we were working together and we were friends. And he's like, I think that's the problem now is we're just becoming more isolated and more tribal. And he's like, I have my own opinions, but he's like, I'm a serviceman. I'm not a politician, and it's not my job to speak out against Trump. And I thought that this CNN reporter just kept pushing him to say, well, please, this is your job. You're a patriot, to talk out against the president. It's like, he's not a politician. He's a lifelong military veteran.
Yeah, he said it best himself, right? I mean, obviously I can't beat Mattis at his own words, but he was a serviceman. I mean, this guy was, after 9/11, he was in charge of the our forces in Afghanistan since 2001. So, this guy's a true professional. And you're right, it's the media trying to get him to be unprofessional and get some stupid clickbait line like, oh, Donald Trump's ears are too weird and he makes fun of his wife, whatever, like some BS. He's like, no, man, I don't agree with him, but yeah, he's a serviceman.
Right. And he's like, well, the president's democratically elected, and it's my job to serve the country under that,
Plus, he's promoting a book, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah, it's like, let him promote his book. Stop trying to make him crap on the president. Like talk about his book.
Yeah, I completely agree. But that's where we're at, man.
Yeah, I heard a part of I was listening to NPR this morning, and they talked to Mattis about his book and all the amount of planning that goes into everything he does and the large scale stuff. And Mattis does seem like he's got a great head on his shoulders. It's a shame that he had to step down from his position, but I understand why. But he's exactly right. He hits the nail on the head of how divisive and how tribal our culture is, our political culture, and just our culture in general. I
agree.
I also think that the pendulum swings back and forth, right? I think people maybe in the '60s were saying the same thing about American culture, and things come along and people change, and I think we go through times of unity like post 9/11 and divisiveness like today in 2019. So hopefully it does not require another massive tragedy to bring us back together. Hopefully it's a positive way to unify, but I have hope that we won't always be this tribal, right? The pendulum will swing back somehow.
Yeah. So why don't we take a 9-hour flight over to the UK for this next discussion on tribalism?
Right. That's right. That's a good, yeah.
Because it's not just happening in the US. I mean, it's a total S-word show over in the UK right now.
Yes, it is.
Do you want to give us a little background on how things have changed at all?
Well,
I don't know.
So I mean, it's to put a long story, and this is a long story short. The United Kingdom a few years ago voted to leave the EU. What that exactly looks like and what means is what's being debated over for the last few years. Some people want to deal with the EU before Britain leaves, right? That'd be a deal Brexit, a EU deal Brexit. Some people don't want a deal with the EU and want just a hard Brexit, Britain to be not associated with the EU. Hard borders, no trade deals. That's a hard leave, no deal Brexit. And a lot of people just don't want to leave at all and want to remain part of the EU. And that is what's being debated over. We had an entire prime minister come and go, Theresa May. She left after was it a vote of no confidence, or did she voluntarily leave? I forget.
Sounds like she voluntarily left. I think she knew that pretty much all that she could do had been done.
Yeah, she kind of knew she was not going to be the one to finish this out. There was the threats, I believe, of a few votes of no confidence. So before they even went all the way through, she just dipped. So now we have Boris Johnson. He's the head of the Conservative parties in the UK. He is one of the main advocates for Brexit back in the day. I don't know if you guys ever saw, the videos of the bus that was driving around, the big, British bus, the red one. It had all this Brexit, messaging on it. That was him. That was Boris Johnson leading the charge. So now he is the Prime Minister of the UK. He is trying to figure out a way to finish this out, this whole Brexit thing, as it's getting more and more unpopular among even his own party. And so one of the ways he was going to do that, what he needed to do that was to make sure he had a good deal and at least an idea of what's going to happen. In order to do that, they had a deadline by October 31st of this year to leave. And so Boris Johnson wanted to delay the parliament because he wanted to delay a vote and not basically not get embarrassed for not having a full plan of what's going on. A lot of people are upset that he wanted to delay this vote and suspend Parliament. And now, just today, we have one of the members of Boris's party leaving and sitting on the other side of Parliament, which means that Boris does not have his majority vote that he needs. And so a Brexit vote, now we're just 3 hours ago, New York Times reporting Brexit vote goes against Boris Johnson and he calls for an election. So this is getting interesting quick. The Prime Minister said, "I don't want an election. The public don't. This is a quote. The public don't want an election. But if the House votes for this bill tomorrow, the public will have to choose who goes to Brussels on October 17th to sort this out and take this country forward."
Yeah, it's a lot to dive into. It seems to me that the one thing Afghanistan and the United Kingdom have in common right now is there's a giant quagmire where leaders go to lose their leadership. Theresa May, seemed to really struggle to get anything done. And now Boris Johnson, I think, is learning it's not as easy, not quite as easy as he thought. The Economist says that Theresa May's gravest issue was to plant the idea that Britain might do well to leave the EU without an exit agreement. Her slogan was, "No deal is better than a bad deal." And I think they're realizing that maybe a deal at all might be better.
Yeah, it's absolutely looking like that. You have major trade issues, right? Getting licenses and vouchers to get, to ferry things across the ocean to the EU. You have the ever looming threat of a rekindling of violence in Northern Ireland. That's a whole episode and 4 more. Yeah. But basically, a no-deal Brexit would have a hard border in the middle of Ireland, between Ireland and Northern Ireland. For many reasons, that would be politically contentious, to say the least, and possibly lead to some, rioting and violence, as we've seen in the past. So there's a lot of looming dark clouds that we really don't have much time. This whole Brexit thing's been going on for 3 years. They have to get something figured out by October 31st. That is going to fly by. Now we're seeing that there might be an election for prime minister in between now and then, with a primary held next week and a general election on October 14th. That's 2 weeks between the general election for a new prime minister and the Brexit deadline of October 31st. I used to procrastinate on some papers in college, but this is now reaching an insane level of really hitting the deadline here.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say what I think and how I think it should be here, is that the problem is they've made their bed and they need to sleep in it. And the problem is, I don't think another election for another prime minister at this point is going to do really very much. We've seen that it's just a gridlock situation that probably has no good option. But the problem is, if you have another referendum, then the people that voted for Brexit in the first place are going to feel like their vote didn't matter. You're going to have gridlock on both sides. And let's be completely honest. I think that the country should probably just stick out Boris Johnson and try to get a deal. And I mean, I want to look at, I mean, Britain's main demand is for the European Union to ditch the so-called Irish backstop. It's a guarantee, the New York Times says, that the bloc insists it needs to ensure that goods flow smoothly across the Irish border, whatever happens in trade negotiations with Britain. And, I mean, Mr. Johnson is going to meet with his counterpart in Ireland in Dublin next week, Leo Varadkar. I'm probably going to butcher that. And, I mean, so what does it do good now if there's another election for a new prime minister? I mean, Boris Johnson is meeting with Ireland's leader, and I mean, if we just keep pushing back and putting another election and putting this off, I mean, it's just creating more economic instability in not only Britain but the world. And I mean, let's be honest, maybe they just need to stick out Boris Johnson and try to get things done, because I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party leader, that'd be kind of the Democratic Party leader in the United States. He doesn't have any good options either. And his party has a lot of left policies that are not popular with people either. And now he has a lot of controversy about him being an anti-Semite. So I don't know if he became the leader, if anything better would happen. So I kind of go, this is just a stalemate that needs to be fixed. And so the European Union, I know they are not happy with this either. But let's be honest, if these two don't sit down and talk, that global recession is going to come on us like a wrecking ball.
Absolutely. A no-deal Brexit would be terrible. I think a deal Brexit is probably the most likely and the best, quote unquote, best solution. I don't see. Look, I think no matter what, it's going to be bad for the UK. I mean, either you do or you don't have an election and another referendum. Let's say we have another referendum and people vote to remain part of the EU. Okay, that might be the best economically, but guess what? That's the biggest 3-year embarrassment the UK's ever had since they lost colonies. So it's like, you know, like that's 3 years of wasted time that the entire world just saw and laughed at. Not that we can talk really, but so that's not going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. I think a no-deal Brexit would be terrible for the UK economy and the world economy at large, and could lead to a lot of inflammatory political rhetoric. I think the best option. I think you're kind of right. Like, Boris Johnson is less than ideal, but he's kind of the, you know, if you can't be with the ones you love the ones you're with. So figure something out, get this done. Then maybe, you know, get a new prime minister.
Toss him to the curb.
Yeah. But like, this is, you know, you're stuck with him for now. He may be the shortest prime minister in British history. I read online that the last one, I forget his name, but the last one was like 117 days was the shortest prime minister. Now Boris might get 2 weeks, so we'll see. That would be quite the record he sets. But we'll see. But I don't think there's any good outcome for the UK in this one. I also think that no matter the outcome, the global economy is probably going to take a little bit of a hit. Further adding instability to the global economy.
Yeah. I mean, The Economist says a no deal would make the economy 9% smaller after 15 years than if Britain had remained. 9% with, I think Britain's the 6th biggest economy in the world now. I think California just passed them. Almost a 10% decrease in the next 15 years does not sound good.
It's really bad. It's really bad, especially considering when you have, you know, just 0.5% of growth in a year. People think that's like, oh, that's a slow economy. You're talking about a 10% decrease over 15 years. That's really bad.
Yeah, that's insane. That's not just slow growth. That's almost probably like 0.75 decline a year.
Yeah, that's contraction. That's really, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, so I want to say that The Economist had an interesting point, and I think it would be a good solution moving forward if Parliament actually wants to get anything done. It says Parliament must act now to take no deal off the table. They should pass a law requiring the Prime Minister to ask the EU for an extension. I think that's a good start, is taking a no deal off the table. I think it should be made clear that they should not settle for a no deal. It's going to obviously make the gridlock worse, but like you said earlier, a no deal should be off the table. It's just detrimental.
Yeah, it's just not a solution. It'll just cause way more problems that they're going to have to figure out later. Yeah, I mean, and like, I don't know. I'd be interested I'd interested to be to be a fly on the wall in some of the top levels of the EU government. See what they have to say, because I'm sure they're not happy with the UK either. But they also want to maintain some sort of stability so that 9% doesn't also bleed over into France and Germany and stuff. So I imagine that everyone here wants a deal, but they want different things. So I don't know. I mean, gosh.
Well, it's also important to note that the EU has a lot of other things to worry about. Italy. If there's a country right now in the European Union that is going towards chaos potentially faster than the UK right now, is Italy. You had the Five Star Movement and the Northern League, two populist groups, one far right, one far left. They signed a coalition last year after an election. And unsurprisingly, that coalition has hit the fan. For obvious reasons, you far right and far left trying to have a coalition, and so they've lost their prime minister. They're trying to hold snap elections. The far left group is now trying to find a coalition with the center left group, but there's a lot of animosity. I would see Italy is probably why the EU has other freaking things to worry about right now, Right. But that's my biggest fear in this whole thing, is that it's kind of a double-sided attack, I guess you could say, between Brexit and this Italian crisis. And if things get much worse, I don't know how the world economy gets out of this.
Yeah, I think it would, on top of a trade war with China, I think we'd really enter a real recession, like a real one. And that would be rough, obviously. I do think that, I'm always trying to find some kind of silver lining. I think one silver lining might be that because of how chaotic and pretty ill executed this whole Brexit thing is, that it'll discourage other populist movements from trying to leave the EU. I hope, at least, right? It could be like, oh, wow, this is a lot more complicated. You can't just it's one thing to go around on a bus and yell at people like, we need to be free and independent. It's another thing to actually do it and to figure out what that means. So I'm hoping that other kind of, countries prone to populism like Italy or some of the Eastern European countries, they'll see this and be like, wow, okay, it's a lot tougher than we thought. Maybe we should understand our benefits of being a part of something like the EU.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, I don't know if this is just the beginning, or you're right, setting an example. Eastern Europe seems to be at odds with the EU right now. You have Orban in Hungary. Well, Hungary's not, technically part of the EU, but you do have this growing East-West divide. Going on again. Russia's fueled it. China's definitely helped fueling it by funding these Eastern countries. And I'm concerned, man, because I was reading, it's a few years outdated. It was a Pew study that did say that in the East, citizens say that they were happier under communism than they are under democracy. I think Hungary was number one. They also have the most authoritarian leader in the region. But it is interesting because these people arguably could have been better off. At least they had the basics provided, even though there was also secret police and oppression. But they're now seeing that there's a divide between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe gets pretty much the secondhand products and the secondhand economic tools from Western Europe. You are seeing this divide, and I think they're kind of going, is it worth being in a trade union when we're kind of considered the ugly stepchild? And so I don't know, man. It was actually scary. I think it was like 85% of Hungarians said they were happy under communism than their current state. And Poland was up there, the Ukraine was up there, Czech Republic was up there, and you're kind of going,
Yeah, there is definitely an East-West divide that's there. It even goes past political. It can go into just social and cultural, right? If you look at the willingness to accept homosexual couples, it's vastly, people in Western Europe and France and Britain and stuff are way more likely to be like, yeah, that's fine, I don't even care, whatever. But it's like in Eastern Europe, you have serious culture clash where it's like, no, we're not accepting of homosexual couples. We're not even I read that it was about they're not even accepting of race mixing in some parts of Eastern Europe. It was 18% of people thought it was okay to have a mixed race relationship, and you're like, wow, 18%. That's incredible, in a bad way, I believe, but. No, but there is, it goes past just political. There's a kind of a cultural divide between Eastern and Western Europe, um, that
Yeah.
can manifest in ways that are political.
Well, yeah, the EU had their elections. Oh god, I remember it because I was over in Europe at the time. I think it was in May. It's either late April or May, and the divide was very clear. For the first time, the Liberals lost their majority in the EU, and there was this big divide between the East and the West over resources and over fuel. Poland is still a mainly coal producing country, and a lot of Western Europe, says renewables, blah blah blah. We need to get off of coal. But I kind of understand Poland's argument. Is if they decide to go renewables or gasoline motors, then they have to buy from Russia. So then now they're under Russia's sphere of influence. So they're trying to be self-sustainable by producing coal, but they don't have the infrastructure to do renewables, and so they feel alienated by the Western countries that are saying, well, you need to get rid of coal and follow us. But they're like, well, that pretty much means that we sign a deal with Russia then. And do you want us siding with Russia? We were part of Russia for the last 50 years, and it wasn't too great, and
Right.
so it's tough.
It's tough. Like it all comes back to, man, it's tough out there. Yeah. Well, we'll have to see what happens with Brexit. I think if I was an investor, I would brace for some stormy weather in the couple months ahead, and maybe hope that 2020 is a little bit better, because this fall is going to be interesting with this whole Brexit thing, and how if that leads to a domino effect in Europe. But what you just mentioned about that East-West divide and the different needs for resources and the expectations, right? That's that's not too unlike the United States, where you have, some states that are all about renewables and, large governments doing with environmental regulations, and then you have, Kentucky and West Virginia that are reliant on blue-collar coal work and these industries that are kind of going by the wayside. I mean, it's kind of similar. You have, a populist right and a more of a metropolitan and globalist viewed left.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you put us into another perfect segue into what the hell is happening in the 2020 election field.
Yes. So finally, some people have started to drop. Finally, like flies.
Thank God.
One of the reasons for that is the limitations on the next debate. Do you want to go into a little about who makes the cut and why?
Yeah. So the third primary debate is hosted by ABC and Univision, if that's important to you. Just thought I would let you know. It's going to take place on September 12th. And basically, the candidates needed contributions from at least 130,000 individuals, coming from at least 400 unique donors in 20 or more states. They also needed to reach 2% in at least 4 DNC-approved polls. I'm not a big DNC guy, so I don't like DNC-approved polls, but I get it. So the 10 candidates that have made it, I'm guessing I don't think in any order, actually, based on this list. You have President or former Vice President Joe Biden. You have New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. You have Mayor Pete Buttigieg, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro, California Senator Kamala Harris, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, former Representative Beto O'Rourke, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, and the businessman Andrew Yang. What do you think, Drew? Do you think that's going to be fun?
I think so. I'm glad we've kind of, culled the herd. I understand that there's a lot of people that, they understand. Like, I get it, right? It's the DNC is deciding these limitations. It's not exactly the most democratic, if you want it to be, but it is their party, right? It's the Democratic Party. They can decide who gets into the debates. It doesn't mean you still can't run. And I do think at a certain point it's beneficial for the political process to narrow it down. Not too early, but not too late, right? Like the fact that, we had, because we saw the debates, man. If you watch these debates, they were kind of a laughing stock. Like everyone was fighting and shoving elbows, to get into the debate and have their little soundbite featured in a headline, and it didn't really delve into anyone's deep policy, and a lot of it was just fanfare. So the fact that now we are limiting to, what is it, 10 now?
Yes.
That at least gives some more room to dig into who these people are. And I think at some point, yeah, you have to kind of set some standard to be like, look, if you don't make the cut, if you're polling less than 2% among Democrats, then maybe you're just not the guy or gal. So I don't really have a problem with them culling the herd down to 10 this early because, we weren't exactly getting good debates anyway.
Yeah, and I do think though this list shows a very interesting trend. I'm just kind of looking down it. But it tells me that more than half of these 10 are
progressives.
And so that does tell you where the party's going. I don't like it, but I guess that's what it does make me question. Is this what the DNC wants, or is this what voters want? Because I talk to people every day about this, and I still don't talk to barely anybody that actually sees any of these candidates beating Trump. And these are Democrats, talking to Democrats that go, well, I don't know, like Elizabeth Warren's smart, but some of her policies are a little much. I don't know. And I mean, Kamala Harris, she's, I think, polling at almost like 1% with African Americans. Same with Cory Booker. It's interesting. I mean, Julian Castro, I don't really mind him. He's smart. Bernie's the only one I really think that actually is genuine. Beto, I'm actually kind of shocked he made this. I would have probably preferred Tulsi Gabbard in there over him. Yeah. I know she's not polling well, but I don't like Beto. I don't think he's genuine. Amy Klobuchar just never stuck. I'm kind of surprised she made it too. But I just see these candidates as DNC approved, but I don't know if I see them as working class America approved.
I think the only two that have the three, I'm going to say this, the only three that have, I think, like real grassroots kind of like real populists behind them that could have a real movement is Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Andrew Yang. I think Joe Biden is that like DNC safe bet. Let's basically make the same mistakes we did with Hillary Clinton with this guy now, right? That's he'd be a poor choice in my opinion. He doesn't get people fired up. He's had gaffe after gaffe, and yeah, but he's like the DNC safe choice, which is in reality probably not that safe. I hope Andrew Yang sticks around longer. I don't think he's going to be able to win this just off a hunch. But he has really interesting ideas and a demeanor that I think is needed. He's very calm, collected, and fact-based. And he has a strange coalition of supporters. He's got libertarians, tech bros, Joe Rogan podcast listeners. Like it's like, he's all over the board. But that's fun. That's interesting, and that can actually, be the beginning of something. I also think, like you said, I think Bernie Sanders is the most genuine, and I think his winning ticket is to just hammer down his healthcare plans because that's the way he's going to win by people who voted for Trump in the past is, look, I can make your day-to-day life less expensive, and I'm going to tackle an opioid crisis with this healthcare plan. That to me could be a winning strategy. Elizabeth Warren was the same thing, right? She's kind of more, tuned into the social stuff, which I don't think is good for the swing states and the middle America, right? But other than that, I mean, everyone else just kind of seems, like Beto. What is he even doing there? Like, what's his message? To just speak broken Spanish? Like, when I think of Beto, I don't think of a singular policy thing that he hammers down. I think of him as just, what can I say and what can I parrot other people to like stay relevant? I'm like, dude, screw you, man. You don't have anything to bring to the table.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I have never. I honestly, I was going to ask you, like, what do you like? Is there a policy you remember that Beta's talked about? And the only things I remember is broken Spanish and then a bunch of F-bombs on cable news after the shootings.
Yes, right. Yes. Oh, he swore. He's serious. Oh, okay. Like, cool, man. Like, again, it's not that we're saying is wrong. Like, yeah, people are upset about these shootings, no doubt. But he definitely does not come off genuine when he talks about certain things. And he doesn't bring anything new and fresh to the table at all. I feel like even any policy he would support, someone else would just do it better.
Yeah, I mean, And I want to just jump back on Andrew Yang for a second because I think you're totally right. He fascinates me. He's probably the only one in this 10 that I would support. But I think it's interesting because he, I think, still is the only one that's addressing the root of like just a large majority of the issues we're facing. Because like I've said on many of these podcasts, I think Trump, the opioid crisis, and the shooting problem are all somewhat connected. And I think he's the only guy that keeps recognizing that people are losing purpose. People are losing their jobs. They're not involved in their communities. People feel like they are just not where they should be, and they blame these outsourced jobs and these giant corporations. And I think that's why Trump and Bernie actually appealed to a somewhat similar group in some ways. And I was listening to Andrew Yang. He was talking in front of the DNC, and they were super bored and whatnot. And then he came up and he animated them. And he talked about, well, back in the early 1900s when people were struggling, we broke up the oil companies and we taxed the junk out of them. And he's like, how come Amazon was the one that has ruined a lot of people's jobs? How come we're not taxing them? And so he wants to pay for UBI through taxing these tech companies that have actually been the ones that have kind of messed up our economy.
Right.
And so I think that's a valid point. I mean, I'm not a huge just tax the junk out of corporations, but I think the ones that have disheveled jobs such as Amazon need to pay. And he also, everyone thinks he's only a UBI guy. I was reading he has over 100 specific policies in different fields. Like he wants to invest in nuclear, which I have always said Democrats need to talk about more.
Yes.
If they actually want to be realistic. He also wants to start relocation plans for coastal villages. And he wants to pay through a lot of it by taxing these corporations that aren't paying a cent right now. And, I think he's realistic.
I agree. And you kind of tapped into that. I know your kind of big point over the last few episodes is like, the loss of the soul of America, right? All these problems that we're seeing are kind of connected by a lot of people feeling disenfranchised, and the American dream is kind of, no one believes in the American dream anymore, right? It's, the American dream is dead. No one really talks about it like that. And I think people that feel that way go to these populist, politicians like Sanders or Trump, because these are the people. Yeah. These are the people that are going to bring back their idea of the American dream, not someone like Joe Biden, or especially not someone like Hillary Clinton. Gosh, she represents everything that killed the American dream. So you need someone that has that understanding, and like you said, Yang hits the nail on the head. He understands why people are upset, disenfranchised, and perhaps they're blaming the wrong people for it. And he's like, look, I know who's really doing this. It's these massive tech companies. It's the threat that, not just the threat, but the practice of automation that's basically, eliminating jobs by the thousands. He gets that. I'm not sure if all of his ways to solve those problems will work, but man, am I willing to hear him out. And man, am I willing, I would be willing to give him a shot based on the other candidates. So I hope Yang stays in this race. I hope he brings people back to some sort of reality on the left and the Democratic Party, and not to get, Yang does not care about like he said that one joke, what's the most opposite of Trump is an Asian guy that likes math. Yeah, haha, okay, 4 out of 10 joke. But at least outside of that joke, he's not running on a beat Trump campaign. He's running on a policy proposal that he believes in. I think that's so huge. Joe Biden is just like I'm your uncle that's going to beat up Trump. That's going to lose, man. That's going to lose.
But now I have to ask you, it's Elizabeth Warren versus Joe Biden. We've gone down from these 10. Do you really think Elizabeth Warren's a better option against Trump?
Oh man, it's tough. I think she has a better chance of convincing people in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, of her blue collarness. You know what I mean? I think she has a better chance of that than Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is so associated with the elite that he just doesn't come across as like a, roll up your sleeves guy anymore. He comes across as the rich guy with super nice teeth that says weird stuff. So I think Elizabeth Warren is the better of those two to do that, to convince middle America.
Yeah, that's fair.
What do you think? Because obviously, Trump, Like Trump has a base in the Midwest that is very, very strong. Like who else do you think can carry that?
This is one of the points I probably disagree with you on. I think Trump would completely annihilate Elizabeth Warren in a general election. I think that she's had, and I think this Pocahontas thing, as simple and stupid as it is, I think it'll come back to haunt her, and he'll make sure it does.
Yeah.
Also, there was a big transformation in her political views from back when she was a professor to now. She talked about something called the two-income trap. It was against actually. It wasn't against women in the workplace, but it was against this idea of double incomes and it being a false flag of progress. She was talking about how, for example, okay, so your husband makes $50,000 a year, the wife makes $50,000 a year. Together they have $100,000 and they buy a nice house. Well, if overnight, if the wife loses her $50,000, she loses her job, the family's totally screwed. Same if the husband does it. She talks about how this idea of a lot more women working, it actually somewhat oversaturated the housing costs. And it was an interesting book. I didn't read it, but I looked at some highlights from it, and it was somewhat controversial, but somewhat fascinating. And so she really did have this big change. Like I think a lot of her career, she was a pretty pragmatic liberal. She was not I would say I would put her more in the democratic socialism, scope. But I just think there's a lot of things people don't know about her. And unfortunately, Trump is a person that can really develop negative clickbait on his opponent. And so I just don't really see her doing well against him. I don't know if Biden could either. I mean, to be completely honest, I think Bernie versus Trump is what everyone wanted in 2016. And I mean, you know what? What the hell? I think it'd be fascinating.
Yeah. I think Bernie would have the best chance against Trump because of what I've heard so much about the Bernie or Trump voters in the Midwest. Bernie does have that ability to he strangely somehow he has an ability to appeal to middle America, and I think it's because he hammers home his healthcare plans as well as just like wealth inequality rhetoric. And he's less cringy. Even though he's like goofy, he's less cringy. And he doesn't have these little tiny nicks and scratches that Trump can abuse, like the Pocahontas thing. As terribly racist as that is, it's effective, right? It's painted Elizabeth Warren as kind of a liar about her ancestry or playing it up more than she should, and like she had a cringy video with drinking beer online. It was strange. Yeah, you might be right. I think because my understanding of the question was between Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, who has a better chance of carrying the Midwest. I think it's Elizabeth Warren, but that still doesn't mean she has a mountain to climb against Trump and his base in the Midwest. But yeah, I mean, as far as we're talking about the other candidates, like the recently dropped Kristen Gillibrand, Hickenlooper, Beto. I mean, there's just no way these candidates are gonna appeal to middle America and the Midwest.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's it's gonna be interesting to see because I'm just looking at this list and I'm kind of matching up each name to Trump, and I still don't really see one that I would just say they beat Trump. I think it comes down to hopefully a third party candidate that can suck away some Republicans if Democrats really want to win, because I think either the economy goes down or a third party more conservative runs against Trump, because I don't see either one. I just don't see any of these people being that electable. I mean, it tells you when Joe Biden is still dominating in the polls.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, which is there's a lot to happen between now and the election. I think you would have to have some external factors like the trade war getting worse or a global recession that would really push maybe some people over the edge to be like, all right, I think Trump's had his chance. But I think you're right that I don't think it's going to be on one personality alone that's going to be able to take on Trump. I think there's going to have to be some external factors. So we'll have to see coming up with this debate. September 12th, not too far away. We will be definitely covering that in this podcast, guys. So stay tuned. Please, as always, give us your comments and feedback. We love to hear it. We've gotten feedbacks from some people, and it's always good to hear, no matter what your opinion of us is. And again, thank you for joining us.
Yes, everybody, and you can always check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Podbeam, iTunes, all at the Tonic Accord. And I'm not going to spill the beans yet, but in the next couple weeks, we're going to have some good discussions, some good guests, and I hope you stick around. Have a great week.
Take care.